Hello, it's Alex and welcome to Hey Little Thrifter. Today I'm going to be doing my Q&A. I had a bunch of questions from you guys, some on YouTube and some on Instagram. So thank you ever so much to everyone who asked me questions. I am looking forward to answering them. I feel like this might turn into a long one. Grab a drink, get comfy, and yeah, let's do this. I decided to split the questions up and put them together in like related themes. So first up, we're going to talk about thrift related stuff, and a few people asked me questions about like what is the best thing I've ever thrifted. So the May Cave, Kayla at On the Fritz, Nikki at Nocturnal Bookworm, and Hey It's Laurie all asked me a question like that, and it's a really tough question. I've thrifted so many things that at least I think are amazing, and definitely a lot of the books that I've thrifted have been some of my favourite finds. Other than the books, one of my recent favourite thrifted finds is this pink cassette radio player, because I've been looking for something like this for ages and I finally found it. It was at an estate sale, I think it was last month, so yeah, this is definitely a favourite recent find. And clothes wise, I feel like I have too many favourites to pick from. I love all of the things that I've bought, but one favourite is definitely this amazing coat that I got maybe a couple of months ago. And yeah, it was only like, I don't know, $6 or $8 or something, and it's pretty amazing. And the weather here has got cold recently. It's actually been snowing today, so yeah, I'm hoping to get some use out of this. And Hey It's Laurie also asked how did I get into thrifting, and I guess I've always been fairly thrifty. Basically, I've never been rolling in it, so I have always had to be fairly conscious of what I'm spending. And back in the UK, I would always enjoy going to charity shops, and I guess I didn't buy a ton of clothes there, but I did buy a lot of second-hand clothes off like eBay. And since moving to the US, the thrift stores here are just insane, so I do end up doing quite a bit of shopping there, and I find, yeah, just so many things like clothes, books, homewares, whatever, you name it. So there are a few reasons that I really like thrifting. One is I like a good bargain. Two is the recycling element and reusing items that people are otherwise going to be throwing away. Like, the planet just can't sustain that, so giving things a second life is really important. And also, I just really love the thrill of the hunt, I guess, going into a thrift store and just not knowing what you're going to find. And yes, that does mean that a lot of the time you will leave disappointed and empty-handed, but other times you're going to find something amazing. And yeah, I really love that aspect of it. Stacey at Stacey's Stories asked me what's my favourite store to thrift at, and that would have to be the Salvation Army thrift store. And specifically, my favourite day of the week is Wednesday, because in my area they have 50% off all of the clothes that day. It's usually except one particular colour tag, so you can definitely find some mega bargains that day. And Gayla on Instagram asked me exactly how many pieces of leopard print clothing do I own, which is a really good question. And I had to go through my clothes and count them because I had no idea, but it turns out it's 18, which when you say it doesn't sound like that much, but it kind of is. Okay, moving on to some questions about books. And Todd the librarian asked me what was my first memorable horror novel, and definitely some of the early ones are Within the Point horror series behind me. These were ones I started getting into at around the age of 10 and 11, and I read them for a few years, so yeah, definitely some strong memories there. And another one I remember is the Bumper Book of Ghost Stories, so not a novel per se, but this was one I must have got at around the age of 10 or so, maybe a bit younger, and this was one from a school book fair. I used to remember loving the book fairs. I remember being really into ghosts when I was a kid, and I used to love this cover. I don't remember too much about the contents, but I always loved this cover. I thought it was really cool. And talking about adult horror novels, I'm not sure which one was my first, but a couple of memorable ones were Dracula by Bram Stoker and Lost Souls by Poppy Z. Brite. I went through a massive vampire phase when I was a teenager, so those were two that I read then and loved, and yeah, definitely memorable for me. Cami at Cami's Corner asked me at what age did I begin reading horror, and it must have been around the age of 10 or so with the point horror books. Again, they're going to crop up a lot in this video probably. She also asked me, if only given 3 books to keep from your collection, which would they be? And wow, this was a super difficult question. I looked through all of my shelves and I did ultimately pick 3, but yeah, that was a tough one. I realised once I'd picked my 3 books that they were mostly down to sentimental reasons, and I'm actually quite a sentimental person. I really like keeping hold of photos and mementos over the years, and yeah, so these 3 books are ones that have like a strong sense of nostalgia. So first up is The Dragon Hunter's Handbook by Joyce Hargreaves, and this was a book I borrowed from the library when I was a kid. Dragons was another thing I was completely obsessed with when I was little, and this book, I remember I must have taken it out multiple times from the library, and I did return it eventually. This copy is not the original one that I borrowed, but my husband actually tracked down this for me a few years ago, so I now finally have my own copy, which is really awesome. And this just basically goes through a bunch of different stories about dragons over the years, and it had loads of cool pictures and stuff in, and yeah, it just was something that totally fascinated me. And one of the stories in here is about the dragon at Bamborough Castle, which is in Northumberland in the northeast of England, and one year we went there on a family holiday. We went to Bamborough Castle and it was like all my dreams came true. And I'll add a photo here of me sitting on a cannon holding this book, well, the library copy, and yeah, living the dream basically. And then I actually went back to the UK to visit family early last year, and while I was there we got the chance to spend a bit of time in Northumberland, so we went back to Bamborough Castle and I got to recreate the photo. The top one is 1988 and the bottom one is 2017, so yeah, crazy. The second book is Trick or Treat by Richie Tankersley Cusick. This was my first point horror book and it's one that I loved. I actually reread it recently and still loved it, and also I just love this cover, I think it's amazing. And the third book is Clive Barker's A to Z of Horror. I had this as a teenager and as a budding horror fan growing up in the middle of nowhere and in the days before the internet was really a thing. This was my Bible. Cami also asked, what is my biggest booktube challenge? And there are a couple, but one is definitely time. Sometimes it's just really difficult to find the time to film a video. It can be difficult to finding the time to read, and then obviously film and edit all takes time, and I really enjoy doing it, but sometimes life and work and other responsibilities just get in the way, and yeah, it can be tough to carve out the time to do it. But it's something that the more and more I've been on BookTube, the more I have enjoyed it, so it's something that I do make a point of spending time on. And another challenge I think is just, I guess, being comfortable or uncomfortable as it may be in front of the camera. I wish I could be a bit more casual and chatty in front of the camera, but I just find that talking at length is difficult for me. It's not something I really do on a regular basis, so I find that sometimes I have to re-say things just to get them right and a bit more coherent, and then obviously I have to spend time editing that to give you the best bits. So that's something I would like to work on, but it is a bit of a tough one for me, and obviously the editing process then takes a lot longer, so that comes back to the time issue. So those are a couple of challenges that I have found on BookTube, but like I said, I really enjoy doing this, so it's not something that I can complain about too much. I think it's like everyone, you know, there's never enough hours in the day to do everything you want to do, so it just kind of boils down to that a lot of the time. Kayla at On the Fritz asked me, what bookish buzzwords make you add a book to your TBR? And I had a bit of a difficult time finding an answer for this one. I couldn't really think of any specific buzzwords that seem to crop up regularly in what books I gravitate towards. Maybe there are and I'm just blanking on them, but definitely dark themes are something that attract me to a book. So that can be, you know, covering a very wide range of things, but I think I do gravitate towards dark subject matter and generally messed up stuff. I don't know what that says about me, but those are the kind of things that interest me. And Kayla also asked, what book do you wish you could read for the first time again? And I had a look through my shelves and I picked a couple for this. And we have one really big book and one little book. So we've got The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks and House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielowski. And these are two books that were each very unique and really blew me away when I first read them. And House of Leaves I've only read once, and it would be awesome to experience that again for the first time. And The Wasp Factory I have actually read twice. I read this for the first time as a teenager, and then I picked it up again, must have been sometime in my 20s. And yeah, such an amazing book. And this book is one I've had, like I said, since I was a teenager, and it's just kind of travelled around with me over the years, and I haven't picked it up in a long time. It's just been sitting, you know, in a box or on a shelf over the various places that I've lived. And when I grabbed it for this video, I could see this little thing peeking out of the edge of the book here, and so I had a look through, and apparently I've like bookmarked a few things in here with post-it notes. Genuinely have no recollection of doing that, so I don't know, but I guess there were certain things I really wanted to bookmark. And it's strange because I don't actually bookmark books, I don't annotate them or anything. I have this past year started adding in like quotes that I like or passages that I like from books, but I write them down in a separate notebook and kind of keep them all together. I don't actually do anything to the books themselves. So yeah, it's just really weird that I did that and I remember doing so. So now I definitely have to reread this sometime so I can see which things I bookmarked. The May Cave asked me, what are some genres you don't typically or never read? And I'd have to say romance. I don't know if I've ever actually knowingly picked up a romance novel. It's just not something that I gravitate towards, and maybe I would really enjoy it if I read one. But generally, romance, chick lit, contemporary stuff, I don't know, just doesn't really pique my interest. And she also asked, do you have your book wall just for a background for your channel, or do you keep all of your books like that? And Thieves Way asked, how did you make your wall of books? And this is actually just my point horror books. I always really wanted to be able to display the covers like this, but I didn't really know if that was possible. And I looked around online for something that might do the job, and I never found anything. And luckily my husband is really handy, and once I completed my collection of the point horror books, he very kindly made me this display for them. So we sat down together and kind of came up with what I wanted, and he then whipped this up. It's basically some really slim shelves, and then it's all on like one big back piece, and then that is attached to the wall. I'll add in a photo here at a different angle so you can get a better idea of it, but I'm super pleased with it. Like, he really did such an excellent job. It turned out even better than I could have hoped for, and yeah, this just makes me so happy to have all of these books on display. And the rest of my books are just on shelves. I think if I had all of my books displayed like this, the walls probably wouldn't be able to handle it. Nikki at Nocturnal Bookworm asked, what's the oldest book you own? And I think it's this one. This is The Owls of St Ursula's by Jane Brewster Reid. I picked this up from a second-hand bookshop a few years ago just because it looked interesting and it had an owl on the front. I mean, what more could you want? And this was published in 1910, and it even has an inscription in the front from 1910, December 25th. I guess someone was giving it as a Christmas gift, so it was just a really sweet thing that I found and wanted to pick up. This one, actually published in 1910, I think must be the oldest book that I own. That's over 100 years old, so yeah, that's kind of crazy. Michelle at booklove72 on Instagram asked me, where do you find most of your books? And I mostly buy secondhand, so the majority are from thrift stores and library book sales. And then sometimes if I'm looking for a specific book that I haven't stumbled upon yet, I will buy online from a secondhand place like Abe Books or eBay maybe. And occasionally I will buy new books, and I'd say mostly I'll buy them online from like Amazon or somewhere, just depending on what it is I'm looking for and how easy it is to get hold of. Jordan at JC Street Soldier on Instagram asked me, what is your favourite book series? And I'm actually more of a standalone kind of gal than series, but one of my favourite series has to be the Point Horror books. Most of them are standalones within the Point Horror umbrella, but there are a few duologies and trilogies within there as well. And other than that, the only other series that I can think of that I've read recently and enjoyed would be the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. I started this several years ago when I stumbled upon the first book in a charity shop back in the UK, and I've slowly worked my way through the series. I think I actually finished the last book last year, and yeah, such an amazing series. I gave all of the books either 4 or 5 stars. I have yet to read the one that was written later but fits in somewhere in the middle. I think it's The Wind Through the Keyhole, and I do have a copy of it on my shelf, but I haven't actually picked it up yet. And now we have some questions specifically about Point Horror books. And Thomas at Dirt Farmer Tom on Instagram asked me, are all Point Horror books YA? And yes, so the Point Horror books were a series released starting in the early 1990s in the UK. Most of the titles had already come out in the US like a year or 2 previously, and so they kind of basically picked a bunch of titles and decided to release them under this Point Horror umbrella. And the protagonists in these books were usually a teenage girl, probably about age 16 or so. Matt01389 on Instagram asked me, what was the first Point Horror book that you read? And that is also, we're going back to Trick or Treat by Richie Tankersley Cusick. This was, I'm like 99.9% certain that this was my first one. Marty at Literary Epiphanies asked me, do you have a favourite Point Horror book? And you've guessed it, we're going back to Trick or Treat by Richie Tankersley Cusick. Yeah, I think because this was the first one, it definitely had an impact on me and was definitely a favourite. But as a bonus answer to that question, the Point Horror series released a few short story collections. This was the first one, it's called 13 Tales of Horror, and there's a short story in here by Christopher Pike called Collect Call. It's actually a 2-part story, and yeah, this one was quite a bit darker than some of the Point Horror books I'd read at the time. It felt like a little bit more adult than some of them, and yeah, it was really dark from what I remember, so I remember really enjoying that one. Okay, now moving on to some questions about moving to the US. So Jason at Jason's Weird Reads asked, how did you come to live in America? And Time for Books asked, when and why did I move to America? It's kind of a long story, but I'll try and keep it brief. So my husband is from the US, and we originally met online, and then we met in person, and he was living in Los Angeles at the time and I was living in London. So we ended up having a long distance relationship for a couple of years, and we reached the point where having to visit each other sporadically just wasn't something we could sustain doing, you know, just finding the time to do so and the money just wasn't very easy. And we realised that we'd have to get married just so one of us could move to the country that the other was living in, and then we would actually be able to figure out if we liked each other enough to be married. And we actually celebrated our 7th wedding anniversary earlier this year, so far so good. And anyway, after we got married, he moved to the UK and we lived there together for a few years, and we just reached the point where we were ready for a change and we didn't really have any ties in the UK, so we decided to move to the US. and I've now been here for just over 3 years. Time for Books also asked, what are some differences you like and don't like about living in America? One thing I like is the fact that we were able to buy a house here. I don't know if that would have happened back in the UK. It definitely wouldn't have happened while we were living in London because it's just insanely expensive there. So yeah, I'm really grateful that we were able to find a house here, and it is a serious fixer-upper. It still needs a lot of work. It's like a mega work in progress, but it's ours. So yeah, that's really awesome. And I really like the thrifting too, obviously. And Time for Books also asked, what do you miss most about England? And I do miss my family, of course. We didn't live very close together when I was living there, but knowing that I was, you know, just a train journey away was just a comforting thought. And obviously it did mean we could meet up more frequently than we do at the moment. Like I said, I've been here for just over 3 years now, and I've only had a chance to go back once within that time. So yeah, I wish I had more time and money to be able to visit more frequently, but yeah, that's something I definitely miss. Another thing I miss is some of the food. I could murder someone for fish and chips with mushy peas, quite honestly. And we have found a really good curry place near us here, but it's not quite the same as curry in the UK. So yeah, I do kind of miss a like classic British chicken tikka masala. And Books in the Freezer asked, what was the weirdest thing about moving to America? And there are definitely a few. I think a lot of it is that like it's the same but different kind of feeling. You know, it's definitely got some familiar aspects to it, and we speak the same language or thereabouts. And over time I've found myself adapting to different words just so people will know what I'm talking about. So I'll say mail instead of post, trash instead of rubbish, all that kind of stuff. And another thing I had to get used to was the date format, because in the UK we would say like the 31st of March, whereas over here it would be March 31st. So that was something that did take me a while to retrain my brain, but now it's autopilot, and I think I would actually have a really hard time going back to the British way if and when I have to do so. And Carol at Carol Marie Reads asked if the book buying experience has any difference between the two countries. And I think it's just that I buy more over here. I think it's the same as the thrifting. There's just so much more stuff over here that there's a lot more of it available secondhand. And Carol also asked if there are any hobbies that I haven't mentioned before on my channel. And I guess I have a few. I have always enjoyed being creative in some way or another over the years, ever since I was a kid. And I studied photography at university, so I have a bachelor's in that, and I have a master's in medical art, so that is basically like scientific human anatomy illustrations for education. And that was a really interesting course. I had, you know, some of the art and design background, but not really the science background, and you have to know human anatomy in order to draw it. So that was a big part of the course, and we actually got to study on human cadavers, which is people that have donated their bodies to science, which was really amazing, such a unique experience, and yeah, totally invaluable. And unfortunately I haven't done anything with my degrees. I think starting a career in a creative industry is really difficult, and I just kind of fell into, you know, getting a job to pay the bills and have never really got myself out of that. So yeah, my day job doesn't involve anything creative, unfortunately. But a few other things I really enjoy doing in my spare time are paper cutting, which is where you cut out from one piece of paper an image, so when you put that on a different coloured piece of paper you can see the picture that you've created. And I'll put a couple of examples up here. There's one that I was inspired by Halloween, which is one of my favourite films, and another one that I made for my sister actually for her birthday a few years ago, based on Labyrinth. I also really enjoy baking. With Christmas coming up, every year for the past few years I've made stollen for Christmas, which is kind of like a doughy thing that has marzipan in the middle and then dried fruit, and yeah, it's just generally really yummy, so I'm hoping to make that again this year. I also really enjoy crocheting, and that's something that I took an evening class on some years ago just because I was kind of interested in learning it, and we made a granny square that evening, and yeah, it's something that it took a while to click for me, but once it did, it's actually quite easy. And I'm definitely still like a beginner, you know, I wouldn't be able to handle anything too advanced, but as long as it's a simple pattern, I can make it work. And at the moment I'm actually working on a really big blanket. This is just it folded up, so yeah, it's just like the same stitch over and over again basically, so it's something I can do while I, you know, listen to an audiobook or watch some YouTube or something in the background, and yeah, it's just really therapeutic. And every time I start a new crochet project I say, this time I'm going to weave in my ends as I go along, but basically I haven't, so I've got all of these ends to weave in at some point, but it's just part of the process that's really dull and boring, and I always put it off. And another creative thing that I did for the first time earlier this year was learn taxidermy. I booked myself as like a birthday treat on a course that was being held in Pittsburgh, and it was run by Sarah Ford, who was totally amazing, and it was held at the Weeping Glass, which is a really awesome shop in Pittsburgh. I'll link both of their information below if you want to check them out. But yeah, when I saw that they were hosting a taxidermy class, I was there with bells on. And this was what I made. This is my white rabbit. He is inspired by the white rabbit in Jan Svankmeyer's Alice, which is an Alice in Wonderland adaptation. And there's a ton of stop motion animation in it. And it's one that I saw as a kid, and it was like amazing and traumatizing all at the same time. But yeah, this guy, I made him, and I was really pleased with how he came out. I think for a first attempt, he is really cool. And I do want to mention that all of the rabbits that were used in that class were all ethically sourced. I definitely would not condone killing something in order to do anything like this with it. So I rambled on for quite a while there, but those are a few of the things that I really enjoy doing in my spare time, if and when I can find the time to do so. Okay, now we're going to talk about music. Adriana on Instagram asked me favourite music artist or band, and Vicky at Chapter 32 asked what is your favourite type of music to listen to. And I don't really have one specific band or genre that I like. I think over the years I have, you know, picked up lots of different things that I enjoy listening to. My favourite decade of music is definitely the 1980s. I love everything from like cheesy pop music through to more interesting stuff like goth and new wave. So yeah, I love Depeche Mode, Duran Duran, New Order, all of that good stuff. And when I was a teenager I was a goth, so I was really into bands like the Sisters of Mercy and Bauhaus and The Cure, and bands like 9 Inch Nails, and yeah, I still really enjoy a lot of that music too. Fun fact, when I was a teenager and still living at home, I had a stereo in my bedroom, and you could program it to start playing music, you know, as your alarm. So every morning for who knows how long, I had my alarm set to play This Corrosion by the Sisters of Mercy every morning. I thought it was really cool. I doubt my family and neighbours did. And then a couple of other random bands that I really like are the Misfits. They were a band I got into as a teenager and have just been a favourite over the years. I really love Kraftwerk as well. They're amazing, and I saw them live once some years ago and it was amazing. And I saw the Misfits live a couple of times too, and 9 Inch Nails actually, they were amazing. And another band was Pulp. I saw them play back in the 90s at a festival and it was awesome. They were one of my favourite bands as a young teen, and yeah, still really love them today as well. And I guess to touch on some more recent music, I like a lot of electronic stuff, artists like Lorne and Fuck Buttons, they're both amazing. And other than that, I really like listening to synthy 80s style stuff, that basically the stuff that sounds like you're in a horror film. That is the kind of stuff I like to listen to. And there's actually a YouTube channel called Confused Byproduct of a Misinformed Culture, and he or she has tons of playlists on different musical genres, but the ones that I really like are the ones on this kind of music, so kind of like dark synthy stuff. And there are a few playlists on there which I really enjoy listening to, so I'll link that below as well in case you're interested. And now we're going to talk about films. Emily at Page Turns asked me, what's your favourite horror movie franchise? And I think it would have to be either Halloween or A Nightmare on Elm Street. I think both of the original films are absolutely amazing, and then the sequels are also really good fun. Also Poltergeist, let's not talk about the remake, I didn't see it but it didn't look good. But yeah, the first Poltergeist film is incredible, and I actually also really love Poltergeist 2 and 3. I don't think they get very much love, but I think they're awesome. So yeah, I really enjoy that franchise too, if 3 films is a franchise. I'm not actually sure. And Emily also asked, if you could only have one kind of treat at Halloween, what would it be? And I do have quite a sweet tooth, so I do like a lot of chocolate and sweet treats, but if I could only pick one, it would probably be a Snickers bar. Or if I was in the UK, it would be a Whisper. Todd the Librarian asked, what is your favourite werewolf movie? And it's got to be An American Werewolf in London. That's just hands down amazing. It's such a great film, such a great horror comedy. The effects are amazing, the soundtrack is awesome. Yeah, just such a brilliant film. And I once saw John Landis at a film festival and I stood like a metre away from him or something. It was very exciting. Todd also asked, what is your favourite vampire movie? And this one's a bit more difficult because I went through a big vampire phase as a teenager, so I definitely saw my fair share of vampire movies. So I remember really enjoying some of the Hammer horror vampire films from the 70s, like Countess Dracula and Twins of Evil. I also really enjoyed Bram Stoker's Dracula from the 90s. Say what you will about Keanu Reeves' accent, but I think it's a really beautiful and atmospheric film. And a few other favourites would be Near Dark, The Lost Boys, and Let the Right One In. They're all very different, but all very awesome. And Todd also asked, what is my favourite post-apocalyptic movie? And that's not really a subgenre I guess gravitate towards or really have a favourite, but there were a few that jumped to mind when I thought about it, and it seems that they fall into one of 2 camps. The first being really bleak and depressing, so The Road, based on the novel by Cormac McCarthy. Both the book and the film were amazing, but yeah, super depressing. And another one is Time of the Wolf, directed by Michael Haneke. He's an incredible director and I love all of his films, but yeah, they're all incredibly bleak. And the other camp is the more schlocky, kind of 80s throwback style. So Hobo with a Shotgun and Turbo Kid were 2 that I really enjoyed. And now we're on to the final question. Adriana on Instagram asked me for my top 5 films of all time, which was another really difficult question. I don't think I could really pick only 5 because I do have a lot of favourites, but I did pick 5 for you. I decided to pick 2 of my favourite childhood films, which I still love today. One is Labyrinth from 1986, and the other is The Monster Squad from 1987. I picked 2 of my favourite horror films, so we have Halloween from 1978 and Suspiria from 1977. And I had a tough time picking a 5th film because, yeah, like I said, there were just so many great ones to choose from, but I decided to go with Trainspotting from 1996. I thought this was fitting because it got me into reading Irvine Welsh. When I saw it was based on a novel, I rushed out and bought it and read it before the film came out at the cinema. And yeah, it's just such a great film, such a great soundtrack, and it just really puts me in like a time and a place in my life. So yeah, it has a lot of nostalgic feelings attached to it as well. So that was it. Those were all of the questions and my answers. I hope you enjoyed it. I really do appreciate all of you sending me questions, and yeah, it was a lot of fun answering them. Thank you ever so much for watching, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!